And he has traveled a ways this morning to share a great message, one that he's very passionate about. I've known Jamie for more than 30 years. When I was at Iowa State University, we worked on a cooperative project with the Fisheries and Wildlife Biology Club, bringing the river otters back to Iowa. And Jamie had an integral part with the Iowa Trappers Association and our Wildlife Biology Club. And it's been fun to, reconnect over these years. But he's done so many things throughout the course of his career. He's a lifetime master gardener and water garden consultant from, again, Boone, Iowa. He's received numerous accolades for his efforts over the years, including from the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture at Iowa State and the Iowa Beekeepers Association. And I know there's some beekeepers, fellow beekeepers in the crowd too, so he's got some great messages to share. We're happy to co-sponsor this presentation with the Dorothy Pico Nature Center and thank them for all their continued efforts and support. And we hope that you'll enjoy Jamie's message today. And we get a chance to see you again in the future with lots of things coming up between our garden walks coming up this summer, our plant sale coming up in May, and our next month's program in April on the 12th. We'll share more about the plants we'll be hosting and offering for that sale. We also have a couple more plant sales, probably a pop-up one in the summer and for sure one in the fall, and another grant program both in the spring and fall. So there's a whole host of things to get involved with, and we'd love to have you as a participant. Either way, if you're actively participating with this group, or we really want you to participate in your own backyard, in your own space, creating great habitats for our native wildlife. So with that, I'm going to welcome Jamie to share his message with us today, and thank him again.
Thank you, Dawn. Appreciate it. So, I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to present to you guys. It's a heck of an opportunity for me to get a message out that's very important to me. I get kind of emotional at times about this, as you'll see as I get into this. I am basically an environmentalist too, and I care about our environment. I know a lot of you are in that same boat. So I've spent a lifetime dealing with nature, and actually I did a program here a year ago or so on creating water in a landscape, putting water into a landscape. And when you do that, you're adding a whole new ecosystem into a landscape. When you add water, you're bringing in a whole host of new critters that normally would not be there. And so I spent a lifetime creating those water features, water gardens, water fountains, and all that into people's landscapes. And it brings nature up close and personal to people right in their own backyards. And so about 10 years ago, I got into honeybees. And that has changed me dramatically. It's amazing how wonderful bees, their biology, how wonderful it is for them to be able to survive and produce a product that humans can use. And it's shown a side of nature to me that I never thought of before. And I graduated with a master's in wildlife biology way back when. You'd think I'd know a lot already, but I didn't. And I'm still learning. We all are still learning, of course, but you're going to see in this presentation how much it's opened up, and I hope it does for you too. So, I am all these things. I do keep bees. This is a jar of honey. I just wanted to show you that I'm a legitimate beekeeper and produce honey. And this is a jar of my honey. Dean Johnson right up front here, his wife Barb, also produce honey, and they're very good beekeepers in this area, and he sells honey here. So this is a jar of his honey right up front here. So his price is pretty competitive too, so you might want to consider that.
He's also the volunteer beekeeper here.
A volunteer beekeeper
with our
here.
observation hive, yeah.
Maintains the observation hive. So Dean and Barb do a lot for beekeepers across the state too, more than just here, by the way, Dawn.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
He's a huge volunteer for beekeepers, so thank you guys for doing that. Anyway, beekeeping. So the My next slide is going to introduce the subject a little bit more, so let's talk about pollinators. What do they include? It seems simple, doesn't it? But it's amazing the variety of pollinators we have out there. Of course, butterflies like monarchs. It's an obvious pollinator. Monarchs, by the way, is what we call a gateway insect. I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit. But monarchs are a gateway insect. Bumblebees. Bumblebees is a huge pollinator. And as you'll see in my talk, I talk a little bit more about them a little bit later on, but bumblebees are a good one. Hummingbirds. Hummingbirds, well, they visit flower to flower, so they're transferring pollen from flower to flower and being a pollinator. Most people don't think of a hummingbird as a pollinator, but they are. Hundreds of all kinds of native bees. Hundreds of species. The mason bees, the little sweat bees, you know, there's hundreds of species of those. And those are native, most of them. So, and then of course honeybees, which, by the way, is not native. It's been here in the US since white man settled. So, actually they're showing that there was another species of honeybee in the US even longer ago. But anyway, honeybees is another gateway insect, okay? This is a very important concept I want you guys to think about here in just a moment. And so any insect or critter that visits a flower can be a pollinator. How about a fox? Would you think of a fox as a pollinator? Not normally, but if it goes from a flower, it licks a flower, it goes to another flower, it licks that same species of flower, it pollinates. Generally speaking, I would not consider a vertebrate like fox as being a pollinator, but they can be. So, bats are a pollinator too, some species of bats, so just as another vertebrate species. So from now on, when I say bees, I'm just referring to pollinators in general, even bats and hummingbirds, so, okay? So, just to save words. What's a gateway insect? Can anybody tell me what their thinking is a gateway insect? Anybody? Okay, I'll describe it. A gateway insect is a species of critter that everyone knows well. Everybody knows monarchs. Everybody knows honeybees, and they love them, right? We all love our honeybees, we love our monarchs. Those gateway insects make the news, where other critters do not so much. So they open the door, or gate, to relate problems that these insects face. And the policy and public media people, they jump onto it. They report that news. If monarch population is low, they talk about it. Whereas if the regal flittery population is low, where do you ever see that information? So it needs to be said, but it's not. It's not picked up because it's not as well known. Make sense? So, the honeybee, monarchs, there's other species out there that would be considered a gateway insect, but those two come to mind. It was a gateway insect for me, okay? So, the care of my honeybees and their problems of survival has brought me to the point of being very emotional. I've mentioned this earlier. I do get emotional about this, and you're going to see that throughout my talk here. But my goal right now is to how I can help protect them. Whereas protecting them, I'm also protecting all of our pollinators. So my goals are to change people's attitudes about a lot of different subjects we're going to be talking about today. And honeybees are so vital to our economy and to our ecosystems, as well as other pollinators. So, okay? Gateway insect. So why are we taking the time today to talk about our plants and habitat for pollinators? Why aren't we? I hate to bring up anything negative, but we have to face the fact that almost every population of bee species is declining. I'm going to say that again. Almost every species. There's 2 or 3 out there I've heard that are not declining, but every other bee species is. I just heard, yesterday I was reading that in the last 2 decades, 22% of our butter population has declined. by 22% in 2 decades. 22%. That's a fifth to approaching a quarter of our butterfly population is decreasing. Why is that? And this is a negative. I hate to talk about something negative, but we need to be figuring out what's going on, right? So this includes bumblebees, native bees, and monarchs, of course. They're declining. Even our honeybees. You think, well, geez, how can honeybees declining when there's so many beekeepers? Well, just this last winter, out in California, where a lot of commercial beekeepers send their bees out to California, the almond orchards to pollinate the almonds, they're reporting 75% losses of their hives in California. Think about that. 75%? Can you imagine a cattle producer losing 3/4 of its head of cattle? Can you imagine that? Well, it's commercial beekeepers, that's what they're losing. They're losing those kinds of numbers. Why is it? They can't figure it out. Right now, they're very smart people are working on it. They don't know. There's some theories out there, but they don't know. So, the only reason honeybees are doing okay, relatively, is that these commercial beekeepers do splits, they raise queens, they purposely try to increase their populations. And they're very good at that. They're very good at increasing they can maintain their population, but at a huge expense to do this, but that's the reason our honeybees are doing okay. So, what's killing them? Let's talk about this a little bit. Many reasons come to mind: pesticides, fungicides, the insecticides that are out there, parasites and diseases, and finally the loss of habitat and diversity. Okay? We can do something on all of them if we recognize the issues. Right now, habitat loss is very, very high, and it's getting worse. And I'll focus primarily on the habitat part today, with a bit of info on pesticides. Oh, by the way, I like comments and questions a lot, and if somebody raises their hand, fire away. It doesn't interrupt my train of thought at all. I like those comments and questions. So if you think of something, fire away, okay? So, let's talk about habitat. Okay, before I get into that, I now need to talk about something emotionally that's happening to me. So I call this compassion fatigue. I get overwhelmed by all these issues, not only for our pollinators, but other issues too, but I get depressed. I do, I simply get depressed. However, by doing this presentation, and by spreading the importance of our pollinators, I'm getting over my compassion fatigue by doing this. And as you listen to this, maybe you can go back home and talk about this with your friends and neighbors, and overcome, if you do have the same symptoms I do, if you overcome this compassion fatigue. Okay? So, in nature, diversity is the key to stability. I'm going to say that again. In nature, diversity is the key to stability. It's interesting, but diversity is key to our quality of life too, as humans. Having diversity in our life is important. But in nature, it's so much more important from the standpoint of stability in nature. Diversity includes sources of pollen, which is their protein source, sources of nectar, which is their carbohydrate source. They need protein and carbohydrates just like we do. Sources of other nutrients, like nutrients for making propolis. Us beekeepers know propolis very, very well. It's a very sticky substance. Bees use that to plug holes in their hive, and they coat the inside of their hive with propolis. It's actually a very antiseptic coating inside their hives. So they have to have the ingredients for propolis. So diversity can provide that. Sources of water, protection from wind, extreme weather, protection from predators, and they actually need homes to reside in also. Okay, like hollow stems of plants. Seems simple. Yeah, there's a lot of native bees that occupy hollow stems of plants. Not honeybees, but other native pollinators. Okay, what can you do for creating diversity? It can be performed in 3 ways, your effort. There's the easy technique. I like the easy part. Not doing much. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And I really mean easy. The hard part, the challenging part may be changing people's attitudes. And I'm gonna bring that point home very, very hard with you today. That's the hard part. You'll see what I mean. And then there's the fun, the joyful part of planting great plants. Look what the Wild Ones group does out here with planting native plants. That's the fun part, you know, creating those plants, putting them in your own landscape. That's the fun part. Then there's the easy technique of spreading the words. And that's what I want to talk to you more about today. Tell your neighbors, tell government officials. Really scream it out loud. Okay? Let's talk about the easy part. And like I say, it's about changing some attitudes, which is the hard part. But let's talk about the easy part. The more you know, the less you mow. This was a quote said by a former Iowa honey queen. When she said that, that was, I'm going to say 8-10 years ago, I heard that quote. I go, wow, she's right. I mow a lot less now. We're going to talk more about that. I want to carry that message a bit further. The more you know, the more you like weeds. Okay, weeds. Ugh. It seems like a majority of Americans want a golf course green looking lawn. You know, when you watch the Masters golf tournament, every blade of grass is in perfect place. The edge of the water is perfect. The amount of effort it takes to create that perfection is astronomical. But in that bluegrass lawn, there is no diversity. It's a monoculture. There's no diversity in there. And consequently, nature takes a back seat in that landscape. I'm going to say that again. Nature takes a back seat to that landscape. So the first type of plants I'm going to mention are bee-friendly, are weeds. Okay? It's easy to plant these because they're already there. And it's easy to maintain. No spraying, no hand weeding, no whatever. So it's important. And it's also, by spraying herbicides and even insecticides on some of these quote-unquote weeds, we're polluting our environment with all these chemicals. We really are. And for reasons that are really not justified in my mind. Okay? Let's talk about dandelions. You know, when I was a young guy, I mowed my yard a certain way one week, the next, mowed it a different way the next week. You know, it was important to create that nice hatch mark look. And then I sprayed all the dandelions, I sprayed all the violets, I sprayed even creeping Charlie. I didn't want any of those weeds. I wanted the monoculture look. As a young person, I was a wildlifer. I am a wildlifer, was a wildlifer back then, but I still did all this, not knowing what I was doing. Since then, if it's green and growing, I don't spray it. If it's green and growing, it's protecting the soil. Okay? Now, like I said, this is the hard part. Now, changing people's minds about creeping Charlie is an uphill battle for me. It is invasive into flower beds. I know, I've been there. And then I remember my neighbors all around me had creeping Charlie in their yards. They didn't do anything about it. They were the smart ones. But I sprayed it. And then they would creep in from the neighbors' yards. I'd get so mad at them. I go, you need to do something about your creeping Charlie. But you know, there's a creeping Charlie patch near one of my hives that you would not believe how many bees visit that creeping Charlie. And it's more than just honeybees. All kinds of native bees are on it. I see the bees coming back into the hive with pollen on their back legs. It's blue pollen. I know that's coming from creeping Charlie. It's blue pollen on their legs. So, creeping Charlie is a wonderful plant for my bees and also other pollinators. So, it's a classic love-hate relationship. And what is needed is an attitude change. And that is the hard part, believe me. So you don't need to spray, don't need to mow, and mow as little as possible. Remember, the more you know, the less you mow. So, now, Us beekeepers, I know there's several of us in the room here today, whenever we see the first dandelion bloom, what's that mean, Dean? What's that mean when the first dandelion blooms?
Spring and food for the bees.
There you go. That's the first sign of nectar flow for us beekeepers. Every time, I don't know how many times I see on Facebook posts, they show a picture of a dandelion bloom. Everybody goes, ah, winter's over, nectar's flowing, right, Dean? Everybody says that. I don't know of a beekeeper out there anymore that sprays their dandelions. Do you, Dean?
No.
There you go. John, do you spray dandelions? Seriously, I quit spraying dandelions when I started keeping bees. And remember, that's a gateway insect. So all of the pollinators are benefiting from me not spraying dandelions, as well as other broadleaves. Okay? So, some turned into a love. There are weeds like milkweeds. Let's talk about milkweeds a little bit. When I was a kid growing up, I walked beans. How many of us old guys, we used to walk beans when we were younger. And milkweeds was a scourge. It was, I remember several farmers that would tell me, I want butterprint cut, I want volunteer corn cut, I want cockleburs out of there, and I want milkweeds out of there. Sure. And this was back in the day when we had, a lot of milkweeds everywhere, and so we cut those. Nowadays, we're planting milkweeds. You don't see anybody cutting milkweeds on purpose, or let me put it this way, anybody in the know. We're leaving our milkweeds now, and there's a lot of cool varieties of milkweeds, more than just the common milkweed. But that's an attitude change. It has changed. So it is possible to change attitude about some of our weeds. It is possible. It's been changed about milkweeds. Okay? Why? Because of the monarch butterfly, the gateway insect. Everybody wants to save the monarch. We need more milkweeds to save the monarch. But by saving those milkweeds, we're saving plants for our other pollinators too. Okay? Now, there are weeds like honeysuckle. That's a scourge. And honeysuckle, bees love honeysuckle, by the way, and all our pollinators love it. But it is a very invasive plant, and it smothers our ephemerals out there in our landscapes. And those ephemerals are important for our pollinators also. We do need to get rid of honeysuckle. The thorn tree honey locust, same thing. Bees love honey locusts, but they're a real scourge in our pastures. So we want to get rid of those. So I'm not advocating saving all weeds, but there are a few that we need to think about. Native thistles. Native thistles, yeah, they have thorns, but our bumblebees love them. We were looking at the display that, Teresa, you were talking about the display up here, talking about adding a picture of a thistle or having a thistle in your display. It's important to have those thistles in there, even though people don't like them. They're a very important nectar source for our bumblebees. Why not honeybees? It's rare for me to see a honeybee on a thistle bloom. Why is that? Can anybody tell me why the difference between why a butterfly or a bumblebee would be on a thistle bloom and not a honeybee? Anybody? So length of their proboscis. A honeybee's proboscis is this short little thing. A butterfly proboscis, bumblebee proboscis can get down into those nectaries. They can poke down in there. Whereas a honeybee can't get to it. You'll see occasionally a honeybee go into a thistle bloom, but it's frustrating for the honeybee to get down in there. So it's rare to see them on there. That's our native thistles. Natives are very important. The Canada thistle is an invasive plant. I never advocate Canada thistle. Believe me, it's a scourge. We do need to get rid of Canada thistle, and I don't see as many bees on our Canada thistle as I do our native thistles. So just FYI, it's not a native. So, how about Dutch clover? I don't think Dutch clover is a native either, but Dutch clover is a great pollinator plant. Matter of fact, I've known beekeepers go out and buy Dutch clover seed, and they go down the road spreading Dutch clover seed in the median. I love it. They're not only the median, but on the shoulders of the road, they're spreading it. And they're buying the seed and spreading it everywhere. So it's a good nectar source. By the way, the honey that comes out of Dutch clover is very good. It's a sought after, if you know you have Dutch clover honey, that is a sought after honey. It's a very tasty honey. So, and what about sweet clover? Another very good nectar source and a very sweet honey. So, yeah. Don't spray those. And seriously, I was such a Dutch clover hater and sweet clover hater 10 years ago. Changed my tune on those too. Here's a tree, lawn service ad, True Green lawn service ad. Really woke me up when I saw this. The perfect lawn is only a quote away. What do you think they were referring to in a perfect lawn? They kill all the weeds. They want that monoculture. They want to promote that. And seriously, these lawn service ads, I see these everywhere, that everybody wants this perfect bluegrass lawn. And I was there. But us people that really love nature have switched it around. So we got to change that attitude somehow. Got to do it. They're more caring about their golf course style lawns, chemically grown lawns, than they care about nature, bees. They care more about that perfect landscape versus nature. But I beg to differ. The perfect landscape is diversity. That's the perfect landscape. Okay? The fun part, let's talk about plants. And a lot of you may have come today thinking, oh, I'm going to know all kinds of great pollinator plants to plant. We're going to talk about some of them, but I wanted to talk about the ones that you don't have to really work at promoting. But that may be the reason you came, is to hear about fun plants to plant. Let's talk about some. There's basic principles in plants on what to choose for pollinators. Basic principles. Okay? You want to choose plants that are native, right? You wild ones group out here. Native, native, native all the way. Matter of fact, when I did my water garden talk, they were trying to get me to focus on native water lilies. What kind of native aquatic plants can we put in? I remember that conversation. And seriously, I was at a loss at some of those. There are native water plants too that we can focus on. But choose plants that are native. Why? Why is it important to choose native plants? Because our native bees have adapted to those native plants. They evolved with them. And so our native bees are attuned to those. They don't all have to be native. And I'm going to give you some examples that aren't native that are still good pollinator plants and that are not invasive. Choose plants that provide a nectar source, a pollen source. You remember all those sources of what our pollinators need? The propolis source. Also for fungi. You're going, fungi? Why would I want to put something in that has fungi on it? So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Diversity. Remember that diversity word? There's that word again. It's critical for our way of thinking. Now, the nectar and pollen sources at certain times of the year are in very, very short supply. Early spring is our nectar source is in very, very short supply. Right now, there's no nectar out there for our bees. Zero. Nor pollen. There's no source for those. Matter of fact, our honeybees are going after what they think is a pollen source by dust. They'll go after grain dust. You'll see them picking up dust around your bird feeders. Sometimes they'll go to those bird feeders, pick up that dust. They think it's pollen. They're so desperate for it. It doesn't do them any good, but the field bees think they're doing something good. It doesn't do them any good at all, but they're there looking for that. It's because there's nothing else out there. So we want really early bloom and really late bloom. Those are the best plants for us to think about, early and late bloom. So what are some of those really early blooms? I'm going to talk about them, and really late blooms. Mid-season plants are common. They're more common, our mid-season plants. But the early and late bloomers, I want to talk about that a little bit. Okay? Basic principle, more basic principles. Another thing to think about is use plants that utilize the the best use of space. For example, a tree or a shrub has vertical aspect as well as horizontal. A tree is taking advantage of the horizontal space, but also the vertical space. So it's more three-dimensional. Whereas a prairie, pretty horizontal, a little bit of vertical, but pretty horizontal. So make sure you include in your plantings the trees and shrubs, along with prairie, the intermix. Remember diversity, intermix is good. So you want both. They provide soap, okay? The amount of bloom area is increased with the vertical look, okay? Now, trees do take more time. I know that's a fact. It just takes a number of years before you're going to get much bloom off of a tree or a shrub. Whereas a prairie, within 3 years, a lot of times you have, actually within a year, in some varieties you get bloom right away. But remember, the diversity aspect is important. What is a really good early source of pollen and nectar? Willows. What's the first? I think that's probably one of the earliest plants that I'm aware of that provides a nectar and pollen source, are willows. These 6 species of willows here is what I recommend. And I know this presentation is going to be on the website, so you can look at those later on if you want to get particular species of willows. Those willows, by the way, are bee friendly. There's hundreds of species of willows, or I should say varieties of willows. Hundreds of species of varieties. These 6 varieties are some of the more bee friendly varieties. When my willows are in full bloom, which is coming up here in a week or two, they're going to be in full bloom, when the bees will be just covering that willow, just covering it. It's almost deafening to hear. When you're standing next to those, it's deafening to hear all the bees. Not only honeybees, but some of our native ones. Yes, John?
Do they need a wet environment to survive?
Good question. John's asking, do they need a wet environment to survive? Some willows are pretty wide. They can accept a wide range of moisture. Willows do well in a wet spot, but they also do okay in a more drier situation. Good question, by the way. Yeah, another question.
Is there one or two of those that you would recommend for drier spots?
That aquatica is a big one. It would be a drier species, aquatica. It's a bigger plant too. So I'd recommend, if you're going to choose one, I'd choose the way I do things is I go overboard and I get 6. Yes, Don.
Here in the Loess Hills and in the prairies, we also have a prairie willow
Yeah.
that is native.
Uh-huh.
Have you had success, Ruth, with your shoots?
I have some roots growing.
Ruth
Excellent.
has some roots growing, so maybe
There you go.
that. So
A
yeah,
prairie
there
willow.
are, and
Yep.
there's also there's lots of black willow and other native willows too that
There are.
you might not be able to get them commercially as easily, but keep that in mind.
Willows are easy to start too, as
Yeah.
Ruth was just mentioning, as she's cut shoots. They have a rooting hormone themselves. You don't have to even put them in root hormone, right? They start on their own. So willows are easy. There's riverbank willow. I love riverbank willow too, to stabilize banks also. But I know that these are not they're varieties,
They're
so
varieties,
they're offshoots. But again, I don't always advocate 100% native, but these are not invasive species. So actually, some of our native species can be invasive. Some of them can be. So how about cottonwoods? There's a native tree. You go, cottonwoods? What good are cottonwoods? Well, remember me talking about propolis? A cottonwood bud, if you've ever looked at a cottonwood bud, look at it closely and feel it. It's waxy. The bees take that waxy substance back to their hives and they make propolis with that. So they need cottonwoods for that propolis source. Silver maple. Silver maple is an excellent, another early boomer. When you see these little red blossoms on silver maples, bees love that. They love it. What? Silver maple, they grow everywhere. Yes, but it is a good native tree that does well for our pollinators. And there's other woody plants, basswood, linden, box elder. another acer species. Box elder is a type of maple that does very well. And bees love box elder, by the way. And I always consider box elder kind of a weed tree, but our native pollinators love it. Wild plum. Wild plum, I remember seeing wild plum grow on fence lines and so forth, thinking it was a scourge. Wild plum is such a huge source, not only for nectar and pollen, but for wildlife in general. How many times I've seen coyote and fox droppings with wild plum seeds in it. Seriously, and raccoons. They love wild plum. Our pheasants, we have a plum thicket that's probably 100 feet by 150 feet. It's a thicket. They grow in kind of a thicket. They grow rhizomously. And all of our pheasants pile in on those wild plums. There's no food there for them, but it's good protection from predators and so forth. But they love wild plums, more than I ever thought. I'm really a big advocate of planting wild plum in the right spot. It is invasive, so be careful where you put it. Just let it go. Let it go in a spot. It does very well. Black locust, all the prunus species, the peaches, and the apples, and the cherries, all are good sources of nectar for our pollinators. Raspberries, different kinds of blackberries and raspberries. I'll never forget watching a bee work a red raspberry bloom. The honeybee I took time and I'm just watching this bee working this red raspberry bloom. And it's poking its proboscis down in the nectaries, working it. Took quite a while actually for that bee to work that raspberry bloom. It flew off, another bee came in, worked the same bloom. You wouldn't think there'd be any nectar left, but there was. Those raspberries must refill those nectaries pretty quick with nectar. So watch your raspberry blooms. It's a huge source of nectar for our bees. What's interesting about this kind of fruit, as well as other kinds of fruit, is those raspberry blooms that have been visited heavily by our pollinators will be a much bigger raspberry. It's going to have every single nectary was pollinated by those bees. So every nectary is going to have a little seed with a raspberry around it, a little raspberry pit, I guess you'd call it. But there's hundreds of them on one raspberry. Like on this, each one of those, each one of those blooms there, I'm not sure why my plucker isn't working. I know there's one here. Each one of these seeds was a nectary, okay? Now that bee is working down in, now the nectaries are down below those anthers, and while the bee works those anthers, he's getting pollen all over his body. And the body hairs are picking up that pollen while the bee is going after the nectar. The bee then flies to the next bloom and pollinates the anthers on that bloom. So that's the way these pollinators work, of course, okay? Other garden plants, melons, cucumbers, squash, pumpkins, soybeans, yeah, soybeans. Bee yards, apiaries that are next to soybean fields, those soybeans, actually, they've shown them to have a greater yield than next to soybean fields. So that shows you how important it is, our pollinators, even for our soybeans. Now our cornfields, they're self-pollinating. They do not need pollinators, our cornfields. Okay? And so, but soybeans can be a good source of nectar. Alfalfa, normally alfalfa can be a good nectar source, but our current farming techniques is to cut that alfalfa before it actually starts blooming. And so the nectar source really isn't there. If you're growing alfalfa for seed, then the bloom is there, but most of our hay fields with alfalfa really are not a nectar source because they cut it soon, too soon for the blossoms to actually have a benefit. Cover crops like clovers and vetch, crown vetch, good nectar source. Crown vetch is a very invasive plant though. We never want to plant crown vetch, but the hillsides that have been planted with it, I don't think the DOT is planting it anymore, I hope not. But it is a great nectar source. Okay. How about milkweeds? We've talked about milkweeds a little bit already. Butterfly milkweed. great native plant. Who in here has not heard about butterfly milkweed? Almost everybody has heard about butterfly milkweed. It's just a beautiful plant. The intense orange of it. And our butterflies love it. Our monarchs love it. Our gateway insect monarch loves it, but all of our pollinators love it. So, okay. This is a seed pod of common milkweed. The seed pod of butterfly milkweed is more slender, but it's a similar pod. It distributes the seed just like common milkweed, except it's a more slender pod. All of our milkweeds distribute the seed in the same way. How about goldenrod? Now we're talking about late bloomers. The goldenrods, the Russian sage. Russian sage is, I can't believe the number of bees. Is Russian sage a native? Do you know, Dawn?
It's not.
Okay. So not a native, but a great nectar source. Okay. Thank you, Dawn.
Thus the Russian.
Yeah, they can keep it. Okay. Goldenrod. A lot of people think, well, that's, when goldenrod, I'm going to be sneezing a lot if I grow more. There's so much pollen out there in that time of the year that goldenrod contributes some, but yeah. Asters, the fall asters. We've got a lot of native asters that do very well. And how about the sedums, the garden sedums? Great nectar source also. Autumn joy in particular, great nectar source. Now I don't know whether those are, I know the New England asters native, but I don't know about sedums. I don't know. But. Okay, here's not a native, but a tree that I truly love for my bees. This is what they call seven suns flower. It grows like a redbud tree. It can be multi-stemmed. Some redbuds are single stem, but my point is that you can train it to be a single stem plant, but most of the time it's multi-stemmed, like this, multi-stemmed. The beauty of it is, late bloomer, there's really nothing else out there. Even goldenrod is not doing very well then when this tree is blooming. It blooms right up until frost. So great nectar source. It has exfoliating bark. What that means, the bark kind of peels off, kind of like a birch tree. If you're familiar with the birch tree bark, they call it exfoliating bark. It really creates a real pretty look to the trunks of the tree. Calamintha nepeta, not Montrose white, but this is a plant you can put in a pot and put it on your deck. For those of you that don't have a big planting area, you can plant a bunch of these in a pot. There's probably some others, potted native plants. I can't think of any right off the top of my head, but actually Dawn and Ruth would be able to tell you some good native ones to put in pots. But this Calamintha, you not believe how heavily used that it is. It is a perennial, which means it grows back every year. Of course, the pot, you need to bring in a protected place to keep it from freezing, but it is a perennial. And long blooming period. It actually starts blooming fairly early summer and blooms right up until frost. So it's a late nectar source also. Okay. We need you. We need you to help our pollinators. And I'm pointing to all of you out there. We can all do it. Gaining some popularity, but not mowing as much. The No-Mow May, the mayor of Des Moines a couple years ago, declared the month of May as No-Mow May. It's kind of a catchy phrase, and everybody thinks about it. But unfortunately, this is not an option for most people because by the time you do mow it, you wouldn't be able to get the mower through the yard. That's a little bit extreme, but it does create awareness. It does convey that message of not mowing as much. That's the important thing on that No-Mow May philosophy. What needs to be promoted is less mowing at a taller height. Taller height, actually what's interesting, if you mow your yard at a taller height, you're not going to have as much crabgrass because it shades the crabgrass out. You don't have to spread chemicals to keep crabgrass from blooming or from growing. You need just taller grass that keeps the crabgrass shaded, can't grow as well. Now, I can't say it'd be 100% no crabgrass, but very, very little. Where I see a lot of crabgrass is in yards, landscapes that are mowed very short. Make sense? So think about that. Participation is simple. Raise your mower deck. Not mowing as often. You know, these people that mow and use the herbicides, these people that are mowing every other day, I call that recreational mowing. It's like they don't have anything else to do other than mow. So don't use as many herbicides, pesticides, nor manual mover. Talk about work. It's less work, less expense, reduced exposure to chemicals. Okay, I'm going to be talking about something that came up to me this last fall. I'm a huge proponent of gathering leaves, the people that like to bag their leaves. I don't do it anymore, but there's people out there who still bag all their leaves. So I go around and ask them, can I have your leaves? And then I put them on my garden. I'll put a layer of leaves on my garden. And then I till all those leaves in. Talk about the tilth of that garden, the loaminess of that soil. Over the years, I do that every year. You not believe how beautiful soil that is. And I grow some of the best garden plants ever. So this last fall I went out and I was looking for bags of leaves, and I saw this guy that had that golf course green lawn. And he had all his leaves lined up perfectly on his driveway in bags. Perfect. Each bag was the exact same size, same height. It was beautiful. And those bags are nice and clean, so I can throw them in the back of my pickup. I'm not going to get my pickup all dirty. So I stopped. I says, hey, you mind if I take your leaves? No, help yourself. You can have all the leaves you want. Just take them. And then I was looking at his yard, and I could see that 4 of his trees were green ash trees. We had one really nice red oak, but the rest were green ash trees. And I go, those trees are still alive. Are you treating those trees? He goes, yeah, I have a company come in and they treat for emerald ash borer. Oh, really? I says, you know what chemical they're using? No, I don't know. So I started inquiring. They're using derivatives of neonicotinoids, called neonics for short. There's all kinds of derivatives of neonicotinoids. Neonics are lethal to our pollinators. When I say that, deadly to all of our pollinators. Any insect that chews on a leaf that has neonics in it will die, guaranteed, including emerald ash borer. It does keep the emerald ash borer at bay, but every other pollinator that's on that tree will die also. I was looking at him and I go, I don't think I want those leaves anymore. And then I says, matter of fact, I know I don't want those, because all my vegetables, even those leaves, still have neonics in them. And I compost them in my garden. The vegetables will suck that neonic up into my vegetables. The flowers on my vegetables will have neonics in them. I don't want those leaves. I says, thanks, no thanks. Quit treating your trees. He wasn't going to listen to me, because he's that perfectionist. So, besides, he was spending $300 a tree per treatment every other year. 4 trees. $1,200 a year he was spending to treat those 4 ash trees. Now, those trees do provide shade. And I understand that. I understand. The key is let them die. Underplant with some good native trees. I call those treated trees poison popsicles. I mean that very, very much. Though anything that lands on that leaf and chews on that ash tree leaf, we have a lot of native insects that feed on ash tree leaves. A lot of natives. Anyone that chews on that dies. Anyone. They kill tiger swallowtails, morning cloak butterflies, moths like cecropia moth. I'm not seeing as many cecropia moths as I used to. I don't know about the rest of you. It's rare for me to see a cecropia moth. Rare. Those ash tree leaves are laced with neonics, and they're killing off all these other great insects of ours. They're killing them off. Those poison popsicles. And I was telling you about could potentially lace my vegetables and the flowers on my vegetables. Those leaves actually need to go to a landfill. Not composted, but into a landfill, because that compost then has neonics in it. There is a shelf life of neonics of, I've heard, like 7 years. After 7 years, it may be degraded. 7 years, that's a long time. So, you know, like I was telling you, that guy was treating his trees every other year. Well, he could potentially go every 3 years because those neonics stay on in that systemic in that tree for that long a time. So I've had people get pretty emotional with me over this. Oh, my best tree is an ash tree. It overhangs our deck. It's a beautiful tree. I gotta cut it. I gotta cut it down. I go, no, don't cut it down. Let it die. Okay? Let it die. That dead tree can be an important part of our ecosystem. You're going, what? A dead tree? Just topping it. Like if it's overhanging your house, or overhanging another good tree, or overhanging a trail or something, just top it so that it doesn't create a threat to those other places. Leaving the tree, it's still available to the ecosystem. And that's what we're thinking about here, is the whole ecosystem, leaving that dead tree. They provide a wide range of critters for their homes and food. This includes a lot of our pollinators, like native bees and honeybees. You're going, what? Where does a honeybee nest? In hollow trees, normally. So, what about all the other cool critters that use our dead trees? Now these are trees in my own landscape, right out my front door. This tree actually broke off in the wind. It was a dead ash tree. It broke off, and luckily it didn't fall on anything. This tree, I had a tree trimmer. I didn't want this tree banging, hitting that tree, nor these trees, so I had a tree trimmer come in and just top it. Yeah, you're going, ooh, that's ugly. Jeez, Jamie, you're a crazy dude. You're that dead, ugly tree. I beg to differ. This has been dead for 15 years. Talk about a home to a wide range of critters. A lot of people think that's messy. It's ugly. I beg to differ. I see nature there at its finest. How about these dead trees on the ground? They still provide habitat when they're on the ground, actually even more so. You can bring in logs. If you don't have any dead trees, bring some logs in. Bring some really pretty shaped logs to make it prettier. But they actually provide great homes. You can berm around them. You can create piles of them. Actually, there's people that are putting in deer, what they call slash walls to keep deer from entering an area. They create a pile of logs, and deer won't cross that to get into an area. They call those slash walls. I love that idea. The Iowa Arboretum is doing that big time. Instead of putting up fence, they put in dead trees in a slash wall. So you can actually make them, having moss growing on them like this, really is gorgeous. And that provides homes for a lot of critters. Decaying wood is also home to fungi. You remember me talking about fungi and the benefit of fungi to our pollinators? It hasn't been researched fully, but I know a lot of our native pollinators use fungi in their nests. Our honeybees use fungi to make bee bread. They have to have fungi. They actually nurture. They go out and collect fungi, but they actually nurture fungi into our hives. Right, Dean, John? They use fungi. So these dead trees provide different mycelium, different types of fungi. Okay, here's a pollinator hotel. Man-made. Look at all that. Talk about homes for a lot of our native pollinators. Huge. This is a nature-made hotel. Which is easier? Now, a lot of us think that's prettier. Okay. I beg to differ. That's prettier. I know, it's an attitude change. I know. Look at all the holes in that thing. You know, woodpeckers have been chewing on that, but guess what? A lot of our native pollinators will lay eggs in some of those smaller hoards, bigger holes. But just like that man-made pollinator hotel, it's the same thing, except this is nature-made. So, habitat. How about this for habitat? See this goose nesting in that hollow tree? Kind of unusual. But the point of it is, the reason I'm showing this picture is it provides homes not only for our pollinators and our honeybees, but also to a lot of our wildlife. Wood ducks nest in trees. I can go on, screech owls nest in hollow trees. Woodpeckers, go on and on and on. It's a huge benefit to leave those dead trees. This is something that is very important for me to convey to you, is embrace the wildness. Embrace the messy. This is an attitude change. At least embrace an organized mess. Okay? Now there's strip farming, you know, where you see farmers put in prairie strips around their row crops. That's what we call more of an organized mess, because it's prairie in amongst a row crop. It's kind of an organized way of looking at, and you're bringing in nature right in amongst your row crop. Those bluegrass monoculture lawns, I call dead zones. Those are dead zones, and I'm putting it blatantly to you. It's dead zones. What bothers me more is mowed ditches anymore. I see mowed ditches everywhere. The DOT's doing it. Some of our counties do it. I don't know, Dawn, whether Ruth, you have gotten to your county and not mowing ditches as much. When I say mowing ditches, it's okay it's understandable to mow the median, the shoulder. It's important to do that. But from the bottom of the ditch to the fence line, and there's no trees, no weeds, no thistles in there, leave it. But I see the DOT blanketly mowing ditches for miles. The entire bottom of the ditch for miles, even the medians mowed. Then I hear, well, it's that grass collects snow. Baloney, not in the bottom of the ditch. It's the amount of snow that catches is nothing. That is an excuse. And why they're doing that, think of the taxpayer money that's going into mowing those ditches. I can go on and on about it, but I'm going to be approaching the DOT big mucky mucks and talking to them, can we consider not mowing the medians and the ditches? So, the important thing to remember is we do not have to have things in a certain way or in its place. You don't necessarily have to have that. Installing a planting bed, it was perennial or annual. Just remember to plant low-growing plants in the front, medium-sized plants in the middle, tall plants at the back. It's that simple. Choose your native plants to go in amongst that. Like if I was going to plant some milkweeds, I'd put those in the middle. If I was going to plant something taller, like the Seven Sons flower, which is not a native, I know, but put that more in the back. Okay? So I call this principle the roundy, pointy, flatty principle. It's that simple. Tall in the back, flatty in the front, and the roundies in the middle. It's that simple. So you can go home and remember that when you're putting in a perennial bed, think of those. Let nature take over. I like to tell the plants to duke it out. Duke it out. And you now believe those plants find the best place for them to grow. Even though we want it a certain way, it's not going to be perfect in what we perceive as our mind, but it's perfect from nature's standpoint. There is some tweaking every now and then that's important, but like if you get an invasive plant in there, you have to take that out. So embrace the organized mess. Okay, now sum up. Now I have a handout up here that talks about all these principles. You don't need to write this down, so I want you to come up. We're going to have to make more handouts. But this is the easy and fun techniques of creating diversity. Tell everyone about it. Everyone. Spread the word. Your relatives. Your dad that used to mow the yard, or mows the yard a perfect way. Or your kid is weeding out the weeds or whatever. Tell them. Tell your HOA people, social media, tell it on social media, but tell them, do things like I'm doing, you scream it out. To not mow, get away from this recreational mowing, simply crazy, it's a waste of time. Not spray the good weeds. Not use as many pesticides and herbicides, this is cheaper too. Not plant to plant native pollinator plants that are good nectar pollen sources, including trees. Not cut down the dead trees. They provide habitat, as we've talked about. To leave the leaves in the fall. Also leave the standing vegetation. Leave that in the fall. Cut it when you first start seeing dandelion bloom. Cut it then. Rake the leaves in, because then most of our native pollinators have already fledged by that time, by dandelion bloom. About that time frame. It varies with different pollinators, but if you can resist from raking up those leaves until then, you're doing nature a favor. We waste so much time and resources by doing some of these things. So, this is the best book that I can recommend on creating pollinator habitat. It's called The Living Landscape. Everybody knows about Doug Tolomei, right? Everybody knows Doug is a guru in us circles at creating habitat in urban landscapes. But this is a great picture book as well as a great informational book. So it's a really good reference. So, thank you. Do we have lights while we have